So, I love Frieren. Yeah, I know, shocker. Ever since I started reading the manga a year ago, I've been immediately hooked by the story and this chick's gremlin energy. The show has the moody, introspective vibes of an anthology-ish show like Kino's Journey.
No, not that one.
With the medieval fantasy aesthetic of D&D and some of the best comedy you'll find in the medium nowadays. It's a story about the former elf mage of the hero's party, Frieren. It takes place in the aftermath of their long fight against the Demon Lord, and it follows her travels as she explores the peaceful world, solves local problems, learns new magic, and reflects on her relationships with her former comrades. Not to mention dealing with her jacked up sense of time because elf. The premise is simple, but emotionally raw as we explore what life is like for someone who's lived as long as Frieren has. It's a great story. A popular story. Oh shit, it's popular. So that means... You know, I thought we were over this crap the first fucking time. For those not in the know about this, Frieren's world has many fantasy races. Dwarves, elves, humans, typical medieval fantasy stuff. One of them, and arguably the most powerful, are the demons, intelligent humanoid monsters that are instinctually on the biological level predisposed to killing and eating humans. Not even for their survival either, they're just dicks. Which makes them worse than mosquitoes, if that was even possible. Yes, demons are intelligent and have the capacity for language, but that is a product of their evolution, methods that make it easier to manipulate and kill humans. They're essentially an evolved form of the monsters that already exist in the series. Thus, demons cannot coexist with human society, and the show spent about 2 to 3 episodes establishing why this is the case. They have no empathy towards humans or even their fellow demons. They see themselves above humanity due to their magic, among other things, and they seek pleasure from causing them pain. Simple stuff, really. So, the hell is this? Why do people have a problem with demons in a story being friggin' demons? Why do they think that the story should not have evil races in the first place? Yes, people, that's what the discourse is about. Well, if you can believe it, from dumpster diving into the discourse, there seem to be 2 camps. 1, people who make the moral argument that stories shouldn't have evil races, and 2, people who make the narrative argument that Frieren specifically shouldn't have them. Let's start with the latter, because it actually produces an interesting question about storytelling. So, their argument goes like this. Frieren's narrative is great because much of its storytelling relies on displaying levels of nuance to the audience. It's a story that explores ideas of death, history, relationships, and the passage of time through its endearing, well-motivated characters and its sprawling setting. However, having an intrinsically evil race is very uncomplicated. Isn't it unbecoming of a story like this to lower itself by having an evil race to produce conflict? To that I say, not really. And before I explain that, let me clarify that I have nothing against anyone who simply does not enjoy this aspect of the story. I get it, it's not to everyone's taste, especially since a lot of popular media now don't usually take their fictional monsters or demons in this sort of direction anymore. My issue is with people who make it seem like the show is worse for having evil demons. Does it prevent the series from being fucking Shakespeare? Of course, but how is that a bad thing? A nuanced story doesn't have to be nuanced in all ways, as long as it's not done in avenues that contradicts itself. Take Ozai from Avatar. Would the story be betterer if Ozai had a more complex personality like Zuko, Azula, or any of the other villains in the show? I mean, probably, yeah, but the show being better if they did one thing does not necessarily make it bad for doing something else. Avatar: The Last Airbender already has so many things going on in its story and characters. Adding this one extra element is not impossible to do well. I mean, it's fucking Avatar we're talking about. But it risks the series fucking up or feeling cluttered. It took so much effort to make the show as good as it is already. It's very rare for an anime to be as tightly written as this nowadays. They either feel too quick or too bloated, but Frieren knows how to smartly pace itself in a way that fits the story it tries to tell, making it so that not all demons are bad, okay? Not all demons is bad. Is just asking for more padding than the show is capable of dealing with. Much like many other shows and media. I mean, since I mentioned My Hero earlier, remember that time when My Hero tried to deal with racism in literally the final part of the series, and it ends in like 2 chapters? Nuance is fine and all, but you also need to make sure you have the room for it. Otherwise, you may as well not fucking do it. Not to mention, simplicity isn't the absence of nuance necessarily. Going back to the Ozai example, though we don't learn much about him, there are several context clues that lead to the fact that Ozai is just a product of his environment. I mean, he was built up into a fascist genocidal regime. There's not a whole lot of room to have layers like an ogre, but it fits the themes of the story, showing the effects of how wars caused by these systems can affect people in different ways. Zuko's struggles wouldn't be as engaging if the Fire Lord wasn't so tyrannical. It works in its simplicity. Similarly, the demons act as foils to Frieren. They're both magic-obsessed beings with long lifespans whose morals and emotional responses are much different from humanity. Like, let's really make it clear, Frieren herself doesn't really care all that much if humans die. She doesn't feel particularly super sad about it most of the time, and there are very few examples of her having outbursts over it, or having any strong emotional responses whatsoever. Not to mention their mutual desire for the destruction of the other to the point of cold ruthlessness. The difference is that Frieren has the capacity to learn to empathize with humans by interacting with those like her master Flom and Himmel's party. She becomes more human, whereas the demons become less human the more they are ruled by their animalistic instincts. They are foils to each other. Call it basic all you want, but to say it lacks any nuance at all seems very closed-minded to me. The argument that this show could have done X only works if it tried something and failed, or if we were talking about a basic bitch fantasy story with no distinguishing features whatsoever. So at that point, we're not even talking about Frieren anymore. Demons being evil isn't bad storytelling, it's basic storytelling, and it's basic because it works. Frieren is also not a battle series like many other anime, so the fight against the demons is not the series' focal point. And I know hindsight is 20/20 over here, but I promise you people, the subject of demons and their intrinsically evil nature is gonna go in a much more nuanced direction later down the line. Gee, it's almost like judging the first season of a show so heavily when it just introduced this topic is a little bit unfair. Then again, that doesn't stop people from missing the point entirely. The point is, a story shouldn't be forced to put in as much nuanced elements as possible. If you do that, the story will become cluttered, and it won't necessarily be able to handle everything. So many shows, movies, and video games fail because of this very principle. But you know what? I respect the narrative argument because there is some substance to discuss, and because it's not early 2000s fear-mongering. Speaking of... Okay, now here's the other side of the coin. The moral argument goes like this. Throughout history, many groups, often those with social and political power, have used the rhetoric of essentializing oppressed groups of being inferior or evil to justify the worst crimes against humanity, as well as actions that harm those same groups in some way in everyday life. Such harmful rhetoric and arguments still exist today to the complete detriment of the groups they oppress. A bigot is emboldened by many sources that validate their worldview, and there's been many media that has intentionally or tacitly endorsed those views. Isn't Frieren, by presenting its demons as being intrinsically evil and validating the character's reactions to that, unintentionally endorsing the problematic view that certain races in real life can be as well? And if so, is it wrong to suggest that the story could have removed that aspect to prevent further harm? Yes! Run that shit back and think about this, people. We are talking about racists who are already in an environment, social group, society, etc. that taught them that being bigoted was cool and looking towards fictional stories to embolden them in their worldview. The stupidity of that speaks for itself. I fail to see which part of that is the creator's fault here. There's a small YouTuber named the Bowman who explains this much better than I can, but let me summarize his points on this issue. In other literature, they often display the enemies they hold as not only intrinsically evil, but also display other negative stereotypes that validate paranoid fear of the other, the outsider. Taking their women, taking their jobs, usurping society from the inside, propagating, blah blah blah. Here's a list from his video that displays what those tend to be. However, in Frieren, demons only check off 1 or 2 points in the list, making it less likely that they are some allegory for racism. They're morally apart from humans, dwarves, and elves, but are much fewer in number than they are. So that rules out any stereotype of them being a multiplying plague that aims to infiltrate society. They're acknowledged as being intelligent, almost peerless in their usage of magic. They see themselves above humanity, and they want nothing but to slay people for sport, which makes the other races of the world band together to survive by stealing their methods and taking advantage of their numbers. You'd really need to squint at this as some kind of racist allegory. At least, that's what a normal person would think. To go in the direction described, a racist would need to do what bigots always do: push their ideology over basic common sense. And look in the mirror, because who does that remind you of? Don't get it twisted, I'm not saying you're as bad as actual and unironic racists, but both of you are essentializing certain traits and categories that apply to races in fictional stories and relating that to real life races where it doesn't apply at all. The only difference is that you people don't want to gas us, but coddling minorities isn't much better. Either way, all this does is perpetuate stereotypes by relating vague racialized concepts to stories that never meant to or outright doesn't perpetuate them at all. Let me say this one more time, they are nothing like any race in the real world. In fact, they're not a race at all. They're an entirely different species that want nothing but the destruction of humanity. And by treating them as just poor souls that need a hug, you're falling for the same facade the characters in the story did. I get that your hearts are in the right place, but you're so fearful of bigotry that you think writers should censor the stories they wish to tell to coddle bigots. And for what? To make them 2% less likely to call someone a slur? To make them 2% less likely to harm someone for their skin color, ethnicity, or whatever else? As if the 98% who understand that racism is wrong and bad and we shouldn't do it just suddenly need to be treated like fucking children. Listen people, I don't know about y'all, but when someone, say, for example, shoots up a school because they played a lot of GTA, we usually blame that on things that actually matter. We blame it on the parents who fail to teach their children basic empathy and a difference between reality and fiction. We blame it on the school system for not curtailing rampant bullying, which often contributes to these events. We blame propagandists who directly influence the troubled youth of today. And finally, we blame it on the kids themselves for committing to such actions in the first place.
Also, our mental health system sucks.
In short, we blame these events on the broader, meaningful, observable circumstances that led them there, and not on media that does not affect most people. You know, like what a normal person would do. Because writers make these stories for people with basic common sense. If this discourse is anything to go by, common sense isn't common enough. In fact, let's flip the script here. A racist who has spent most of their lives being fed these sort of attitudes isn't, say, going to get fucking deprogrammed after watching the Richie's Dad, you know the one, episode of Static Shock. If it did, they probably didn't have strong convictions about their ideology in the first place. Maybe it can serve as a potential first step, but that's all dependent on how much they were bought into their bigotry in the first place. But I guess that goes out the window once fictional races get involved. That's when people start going to the Jack Thompson School of Bullshit Pseudoscience. And yes, people, it is pseudoscience. All this for what? Bullshit. That fear-mongering was bullshit back then. It was bullshit when extra credits reared their ugly-ass heads and compared orcs to black people like myself. It was bullshit when Neuralities had the motherfucking nerve to compare weird lolly shit in anime to Birth of a Nation actual propaganda, and it is bullshit now. Whether you add or take away evil races from fiction, it changes nothing. There is no net negative or positive here. There is no tangible, quantifiable difference between a racist who experiences a story with evil races in it and one who doesn't. The only thing that deserves any side eyes from y'all is actual propaganda.
The normal people have spoken!
So, moral of the story. Art can influence reality, but only as far as we allow it to. I understand the importance of looking at media from a cultural, critical lens, but we can't do that at the cost of people's agency. Frieren doesn't deserve to be at fault just because bigots want to feel validated in their bigotry. They're clearly watching the show wrong. And I think we can all agree that minorities have bigger things to worry about than if the show appealed to people who weren't raised right. And on that note, having evil races in your story isn't necessarily bad or boring storytelling. If it's a matter of taste, that's just fine. But whenever you think about whether or not these decisions are made lightly, try to give the author the benefit of the doubt. I mean, trust me, if you go down this rabbit hole, you'll end up thinking that the 3-act structure is boring storytelling as well. Evil races are just another easy solution to a complex problem that is involved with creating stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. And at the very damn least, please give Frieren a chance, because it just started, you know? So, TLDR, evil races are fine, actually. Man, and fucking Goblin Slayer Season 2 is in the same season. Curious how no one made a big deal about that, but oh well. Anyways, happy holidays to ya.